Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if giving something up like food can actually make you feel better? Well, this new study dives deep into that question. Today we're talking about religious fasting and how it might actually boost our overall sense of well-being. It sounds a little counterintuitive, right? Fasting usually means going without something essential, like food. You might think that would make people feel worse, maybe tired, grumpy, or sad. But what if it does the opposite? This research looks at a specific religious fast, Ramadan, and uses a really cool method to see its effects. Fasting is something that has been around forever and is part of many religions across the world. In fact, about half the religions listed in a big history database include fasting. The Islamic fast of Ramadan is one of the most widely observed, with almost a quarter of the world's population participating. Now, when we think about hunger, science often tells us it can make us less nice. People can become more impulsive, more easily annoyed, and even harsher towards others. And there is some evidence that hunger generally doesn't do much for our overall happiness. So you'd expect religious fasting to be linked to fewer good feelings and maybe even some bad behavior. But here is where it gets interesting. Studies looking at people who fast during Ramadan sometimes show the opposite. Muslims fasting during Ramadan might be more generous, and some research suggests they can even have better self-control. However, the overall picture is still a bit fuzzy. Some studies find positive effects from fasting in religions like Christianity and Islam, but others point to null or even negative outcomes, especially with Ramadan. So, it is not entirely clear if well-being consistently goes up during religious fasts, how long any effects might last, or if it is the same everywhere. That is why these researchers decided to look at this using a massive amount of data from the internet. They wanted to answer three main questions. First, does well-being actually increase during Ramadan? Second, do these effects last longer than the fasting period, or maybe even start before it? And third, they explored if the length of the fast itself played a role. Could a longer, more intense fast lead to even better feelings? To do this, they used something really clever, Google search data over 15 years. Why Google searches? Well, they can tell us a lot about what is on people's minds without them having to fill out a survey where they might say what they think they should say. Internet searches are less prone to those biases. They also looked at data from countries where at least 75% of the population is Muslim. This way, they could be pretty sure that most people in those countries were observing Ramadan together. They focused on searches related to negative emotions like sadness, stress, and apathy, as well as mental health terms like depression and antidepressant. They combined these into a single measure of well-being, where a lower proportion of searches for these negative terms meant higher well-being. They looked at weekly data, which they found was more reliable than daily data for this kind of analysis. They set up their analysis to look at the weeks before Ramadan, during Ramadan, and the weeks after, comparing them to normal periods. Now, for that third question about the length of the fast, Ramadan follows the lunar calendar, so its timing shifts throughout the year. This means that in countries further from the equator, the length of daylight and therefore the length of the fast changes a lot from summer to winter. Longer days mean longer fasts. The researchers used this natural variation, like a built-in experiment, to see if fasting longer made a bigger difference. They gathered data on daylight hours for the capital cities of the countries they studied. And what did they find? Big news here, yes. Across many Muslim-majority countries, they found strong evidence that well-being actually increases during Ramadan. It wasn't just a tiny blip. When they looked at the whole Ramadan period, well-being scores were significantly higher compared to other times of the year. They also found something interesting about the timing. Well-being actually seemed to go up the week before Ramadan started. Maybe people were anticipating it or preparing, and the positive effects seemed to stick around for about 2 weeks after Ramadan ended, though they cautioned that these weeks often included a few days of Ramadan itself. When they broke down Ramadan week by week, they saw some patterns. Well-being was higher than baseline in most individual weeks of Ramadan. It was particularly high in the middle week and the last week of Ramadan. This suggests the experience of fasting might build up or become more impactful as the month progresses. Now, scientists always want to make sure their results aren't just a fluke or dependent on one specific way of looking at the data. So, they did a bunch of tests to check if their findings held up. They tried allowing more missing data, which meant including more countries in their analysis. They also tried using different combinations of the negative emotion terms to measure well-being. And guess what? Their main finding that well. Being goes up during Ramadan stayed pretty much the same, even with these different approaches. They even did a permutation test, which is like randomly shuffling the weeks and seeing if their results still show up. These random shuffles almost never produce results as strong as the actual Ramadan weeks, which really beefs up their confidence in the findings. They also looked at each emotion term separately. They found that searches for depression and antidepressants significantly declined during Ramadan, and this was consistent even when they adjusted their analysis to be more lenient with missing data. This is a really strong signal that the mental health aspect is improving. This is where it gets really fascinating. Remember that question about whether longer fasts have stronger effects? The answer is a compelling yes. The researchers found a significant interaction between Ramadan and daylight hours. This means that in countries and years where Ramadan involved longer fasting periods due to longer daylight, the positive effects on well-being were even stronger. It seems that the intensity or difficulty of the ritual might be a key ingredient. So, what does all this mean? It is tempting to say that just not eating or drinking is the magic bullet. But Ramadan is much more than just abstaining from food. It is a time of community-increased prayer, charitable giving, and often avoiding negative behaviors like lying or gossiping. Any of these could be contributing. Also, people often eat large meals before dawn and after sunset. So it is not always about starving. In fact, some studies show people even gain weight during Ramadan. But the fact that longer fasts led to greater well-being is a really important clue. Things like communal meals, charity, and religious focus are likely present, whether the fast is long or short. What changes is the difficulty of the ritual. Longer fasts mean more hunger, thirst, and disruption to routines, which are normally associated with negative feelings. Yet, during Ramadan, these harder experiences seem to be linked to better well-being. This suggests that maybe some level of difficulty or sacrifice is actually necessary for these positive effects. It is like a cost people pay for their religious involvement, and that cost can bring psychological benefits. This ties into broader ideas in science about how costly or difficult religious rituals can actually strengthen group bonds and promote prosocial behavior. They might communicate commitment more effectively. When people go through something challenging together, like a long fast, it can increase their sense of community and cooperation. The shared meals after fasting, the iftar, are also really important. Sharing food is a universal way to build relationships, and breaking a fast together might be especially powerful. The feeling of hunger itself might also help people focus their minds, reprioritize, and amplify positive attitudes, especially when amplified by the longer days. Now, every study has its limits. The researchers couldn't directly compare their Google Trends data with a large survey at the same time to be absolutely sure their measures of well-being were perfectly aligned. Also, they tried to look at shorter fasts like Yom Kippur and Fast Sundays by Latter-day Saints. But these only last a day. Since their data was weekly, the effect of a single fasting day would get buried in 6 non-fasting days, making it impossible to get a clear signal. They also noted that in many countries, the proportion of people observing these other fasts is much lower than the proportion of Muslims observing Ramadan. Overall, this study provides very strong evidence that Ramadan fasting is linked to increased well-being in Muslim-majority countries. These findings are consistent across different ways of looking at the data and different definitions of well-being. The timing also seems important, with potential boosts before and lasting effects after the fast. Religious fasting, a practice observed by billions, might actually be contributing to human flourishing on a population level. It is a powerful reminder that ancient traditions can offer valuable insights into promoting well-being, even in our modern secular world. Understanding how and why these practices work is a critical area for psychology, with real implications for helping individuals and societies thrive. What do you think about this research? Could embracing a little bit of discomfort or sacrifice in a structured way actually lead to feeling better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this interesting, please give us a like and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more dives into the fascinating world of psychology. See you next time.